Aloha. I'm Paul Norman. I'm the executive director of Neighborhood Place of Puna. And the goal of Neighborhood Place of Puna is to um, help create a community in which every child grows up in a safe, stable, and nurturing home. And we do that by, offering a lot of resources and assistance to families directly. Um, But there's also a much bigger component, and that's the kind of social change component. And um, that involves helping our community, helping the our community leaders, our community ministers, and just the community at large understand a little bit better about some of the struggles that families face. And today, I want to share with you a little bit information about ACEs. So ACEs refers to adverse childhood experiences, and really it's a reference to a study that was done between I think 1995 and 1997. And this was really the first large-scale study um, that really looked at the relationship between um, adversity, childhood adversity, and how health outcomes in adults. There were about 1,700, about 1,700, no, I think 17,000 volunteers who participated in this. Maybe I have that off by a power of 10. I'll have to double check that. But it was a very big study. And um, in this study, what they found was an actual link between adverse experiences experienced by children, so children before they reach the age of 18, and long-term health outcomes in adults. So of course or I'm hoping that we all kind of knew intuitively that that trauma, children who are exposed to violence in the home, who lack basic resources, um, who are under a lot of stress as children, and not kind of normal everyday stress, but unhealthy, toxic stress. That I think we intuitively knew that that was bad for children, but we really didn't have any data, right? We didn't really know what the impacts were, what the long-term outcomes were or possibly could be. And so what the ACEs study found was that, and I have to look at my notes here because this really isn't isn't my forte, even though it's kind of my field. But what the ACEs found was that um, there's a correlation or relationship between a high ACE score and premature death, um, quite a few health conditions, including mental health disorders, learning difficulties, um, chronic diseases, addiction, substance use, cigarette smoking, and so forth. Um, and so what the data kind of showed us, even though there are gaps in the data and we need to be careful, we don't want to go too far with it, but what the data shows us is that adverse child experiences, toxic stress in children, um, affect the architecture of the brain, the way that the child's brain develops, but also makes physiological changes that impact the health and well-being of children as they become adults and throughout their adult lifehood, like their adult life. And I think in the United States, we kind of have this idea that yes, the child had a rough experience, had a rough background, whatever, but they can overcome it. And of course, you know, children, if they are surrounded by stable, nurturing adults or a stable, nurturing adult, and they have supports that can kind of be a buffer between these adverse experiences. And yes, the children can be extremely resilient, and as adults, they can be resilient, and they don't have to be completely shaped by these experiences. So yes, there's hope, and we know that the brain is continuing to change and evolve as we're adults. So it's not hopeless. It's like if a child experiences a ton of trauma as a child, bad, but it's not unfixable. It can be ameliorated. It can be made. The child can find ways to overcome these adversities if we give them the support they need. And that's what this is all about. That's what Neighborhood Place of Puna is about. Is because we as individuals and children as individuals are not separate. You know, bodies. You know, body. What is it? The body mind separation. You know, there's not things that happen to their body, but their mind's okay. That's all tied together. But they're also part of a community, right? Neighborhood Place of Puna is there as part of the community to help children, right? And when we as a community deprive children of basic resources, when we deprive families of basic resources, so when I say that, I mean, we're talking about sufficient healthy food to eat. When we deprive them of sufficient mental health services, whether it's for the child or for the parent, when we deprive them of sufficient physical health services, again, whether it's for the child or the parent, we are contributing to adversity in the child's life. I mean, that's one of the categories. Yes, there is violence that either the child experiences directly or that they experience vicariously by witnessing it in the home. But there's also the adversity created lack, by lack of basic resources. Homelessness, not having a stable home, that's huge, right? Not having enough to eat, that's huge. So, as a community, yes, maybe it's hard to recognize and see the an abusive adult or in a child's life, or that's hard to address. Um, but what we can do is we can make sure that every child has a home. We can make sure that every child has sufficient nutritious food to eat, right? And we can make sure that they're loving, caring, supportive adults in that child's life. It might not be the parents. Best case scenario, it is a parent or a relative, but that could be teachers, that could be coaches, that could be, and in order for that child to have the access to those people, they have to be connected to community services. They need to be going to school. They need to have opportunities to play sports. They need to have opportunities to participate in cultural programs. They need to have opportunities to connect with other individuals who can be a buffer. Um, um, when I was in grad school, I was in class with just a brilliant woman who'd been just horribly abused as a child. But and even though she was in this impoverished neighborhood and she went to like, you know, a public school, it wasn't like any fancy school she was going to. She was going to public school. She didn't have, you know, her family didn't have like hidden resources or anything. But there were teachers in that school. And I think she said in particular, a librarian who recognized that something was going on and went out of their way to help her learn to read and to enjoy reading. And for her, the school environment became the safe environment in which she could have some peace, in which she could overcome the really horrible adversity that she experienced as a child. It didn't go away, it was still there, um, but it allowed her to overcome and move forward with her life. Um, and so that's what we, Neighborhood Place of Puna does. We try to help families with young children, find the resources they need so they can be resilient, so they can overcome adversity. But we can't do it alone, right? Building strong families, helping raise um, healthy children is a community effort, right? All of us are involved, and all of us need to be committed to making sure our families have the resources they need, that there's stable, affordable housing available, that there's enough food to eat, and that children have connections to um, caring adults. It's hard. Totally, this is a very difficult thing to do. This is structural change to our society. But we need to get away from thinking that we're all on our own, because we're not. We are a community, right? We together, if we work together, support one another, we can make change. There's plenty of food. There's no reason children shouldn't have food. Do we have the will to make that change? There's housing, but much of it's unaffordable. So do we have the will to make sure that there's affordable housing for families with young children? That's about us. That's about our heart and doing the hard work to make change. And the thing about the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, is it gives us evidence. It gives us data to show that we're not just making this up. We know that there are long-term consequences to children who are exposed to toxic stress, who experience toxic stress, who are exposed to adversity, and there's no help. We know that there are long-term impacts for the child individually, but we know that there's social cost, because who's going to carry the cost of those chronic health concerns? Who's going to carry the cost? Who's going to pay the price for addiction, right? For addiction recovery services or policing or whatever's involved. That's us as a society. And personally, I would rather invest much more money in schools and resources and families up front than invested in policing, invested in emergency room service. I mean, we need emergency rooms, but extra emergency room services. And I'm pretty sure that most of you are the same. Hard to see because this is a long term, it's prevention. Prevention's really hard to see, right? It's why it's so hard. If it's not your habit, it's so hard to exercise. It's kind of a prevention activity, but we can do it. So, thank you for taking a little bit of time out of your life to listen. If you are really interested, there's some great resources out there about the adverse childhood experiences. And personally, I believe that if we work together, we can very quickly create a community in which all children are raised in a healthy, stable, safe, nurturing home. Aloha and mahalo.